Hello again. I hope you're all enjoying your lunch. We're going to get started now. Thank you. Folks, to begin, please join me in welcoming our webcast viewers. My name is Michael Bach, and I'm the CEO of the Canadian Centre for Diversity and Inclusion and a director of the Canadian Club Toronto, and your host for today. Viewers, we're pleased to have you join us. We know that there's a great deal of competition for your time and attention. Whether in person or online, our club works hard to ensure we provide you with the most valuable and engaging experience. We've had lots of practice, more than 120 seasons strong. I know, I look good. I've had a lot of work done. We count on sponsors to support our monthly events. At this time, I'd like to acknowledge the generous support of today's sponsor, Bruce Power, represented by Pat Denzel. Thanks so much. Now, let me introduce our speaker. The Honourable Carolyn Bennett, a medical doctor by training and practice, has been a federal politician for the past 22 years. For the past 4 years, she has held ministerial portfolios that works with our Indigenous peoples as Minister of Crown-Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs. We look forward to hearing Minister Bennett's unique perspective on how we can all contribute to making relations with our First Nations, Inuit, and Métis populations better. Then the Minister will be joined for Q&A by Max Fine Day. Max Fine Day is a Nahayu Nehu from the Sweetgrass First Nation in Saskatchewan, Treaty 6 territory. He is currently serving as the Executive Director of Canadian Roots Exchange, a recognized leader in delivering reconciliation programs to Indigenous and non-Indigenous youth across the country. He is an advisor to the Laidlaw Foundation and a board member for the Interim National Council for Reconciliation. Please ensure you write your questions on the cards provided, and Max will work hard to get them answered. And with that, Minister Bennett, I am pleased to pass the Canadian Club Toronto podium over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. It is an honor to be here, and I thank Chief Laforme, as always, for welcoming us to your territory, and we too acknowledge all of the First Peoples whose moccasins walked this land and who paddled our waters. Their paths and portages are now called Davenport Road and Vaughan Road, and as settlers, I think we're only beginning to understand the true history and the damage done by colonization and misguided government policies. I want to also acknowledge my friends who held public office and worked so hard on these issues, and in Barbara Hall and David Zimmer and my friend Bill Graham. C'est un grand honneur d'être parmi vous aujourd'hui. Je vous remercie chacun et chacune pour choisir d'être ici. Reconciliation is indeed an imperative for Canada, for its progress as a country and as an example to the world. La réconciliation n'est pas optionnelle. La réconciliation réalise des droits autochtones. We know that every one of you who has chosen to be here today because you understand that. How truly wonderful that the organizers had to move to a bigger room. Every one of you knows, as Chief Laforme said, that we have to be doing more. As individuals, communities, businesses, we know we have to eradicate the ignorance and eliminate the racism in our education, health, and justice systems. We know that governments cannot do this alone. We all know that how to be better and want to know how to be better allies. We want to be part of solutions. My truly inspiring Mohawk-speaking parliamentary secretary, Mark Miller from Montreal, wanted me to make sure that it was clear that you shouldn't be afraid to ask questions and look stupid. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Ignorance is our enemy, and we are all guilty of it. Reconciliation will be messy. Old wounds may be reopened so that they ultimately better heal. We may as well acknowledge it out loud. I think we have a good story to tell on the progress that we are making as a government. I decided that it would be better to provide those facts on the placemat in the progress that we are making on water, housing, schools, education, and the progress we are making accelerating the path to self-determination. Over half of the Indian Act bands are now at tables, asserting jurisdiction and charting their path out from under the Indian Act. We no longer ask for cede and surrender or extinguishment. No longer are these conversations funded by loans. So it's the only way that we will be able to truly work nation to nation. The Métis Nation is now working to establish their government so that we can work with them, government to government. And the Inuit-Crown Partnership is producing real results on suicide, TB, housing, and acknowledging the dreadful history that took place in our north. Canadian society has moved forward in our perceptions of Indigenous issues. Last week, I ran into Marie Wilson, the former commissioner of the TRC. She said to me, "At least people are still talking." 22 years ago, the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples released its hugely important report. Sadly, Canadians didn't feel part of it. The report on the recommendations sat on a shelf. Today, over 3/4 of the TRC calls to action are well underway or completed. And happily, the work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission continues. Truth and reconciliation. We have heard the truth, and as Indigenous journalist Karen Pugalis reminded us on Thursday night, as she accepted the coveted High Solomon Award at the Public Policy Forum dinner, Thomas King has said, once we've heard the story, we can't unhear it. We can no longer pretend we didn't know. We didn't learn the truth in school. Our ignorance has allowed stereotypes to persist and racism to continue and maybe even get worse at times. As an MP, I've had a huge advantage. Almost every day I have the opportunity of making new friends. First Nations, Inuit, Métis, who share their stories, who fight for their rights, and change my understanding of what it is to be a Canadian. They have taught me so much. Many of them are here today. Chief Laforme, Max Vine-Day, Cynthia Wesley-Eskimo, Steve Copty, Steve Teekins from NAMI Res. It was amazing to watch Karen Restool school the public policy wonks at the Public Policy Forum dinner on Thursday night to stop talking and listen to the elders' opening prayer. Being the Member of Parliament for Toronto St. Paul's, I have this jewel in the center of my riding. It's called the Native Men's Residence, NAMI Res. Steve Teekins teaches every day about what resilience looks like, why it's important to have a secure personal cultural identity, that's your resilience, that is your self-esteem, that's who you are, that you cannot make healthy choices if you're not proud of who you are. And Steve Teekins and your team are turning lives around one at a time. And for that, we're hugely grateful. And I don't think as a physician I understood how important secure personal cultural identity was in terms of overcoming social determinants of health, moving to healthy choices and better outcomes in health, education, and economic outcomes. I know you all know the 7 grandfather teachings: wisdom, truth, honesty, love, courage, respect, and humility. But my First Nations, Inuit, and Métis friends have provided me with 7 settler learnings, things that were very, very important before the settlers arrived and thought they knew better. And so whether that's thinking 7 generations out or whether it's the medicine wheel instead of the medical model where you keep people well, mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. The Indigenous pedagogy of learning by doing, where we know that that's how we started with adult learning, but now we understand that's the only way people really learn is by doing, not copying off a blackboard, sitting in tidy little rows. Putting children first, as the chief reminded us, is the absolute only way to make really good decisions as a society. It is, I think, important for all of us that we remember that listening to wise women is a good idea. And I think that the idea of elders instead of elderly, I think would be an important thing for us to better understand in terms of how you tap into that wisdom and knowledge. The leadership style, the Indigenous leadership style, is one of asking, not telling. It is about inclusive decision making. I used to think this was feminist leadership. I now understand it's Indigenous, and that it is about like the talking stick going around and understanding there's already a consensus in this room, or that people are going to need more information before they can participate in a decision. To me, it was a little bit about what I did as a family doctor. Ask what's wrong, listen, together make a plan. That's really what we are doing now as elected representatives. We actually, and we talked about it, whether it's the tech sector or whether it's you cannot make good policy if you're not talking to the people affected by it and who live it. So it is for me exactly my responsibility as the Minister of Crown-Indigenous Relations. It is asking, and then working in partnership, and as the chief said, it's actually getting out of the way so that the healing can get on and people can organize their nations in the way that works for them. As you know, it said in the mandate letter of every minister that there would be a new relationship. It would be based on the recognition of rights, respect, cooperation, and partnership. Every single minister has to do that, and I believe that understanding of a relationship, it is the recognition of rights, respect, cooperation, and partnership, is not only for ministers, it's for all MPs, and frankly, it's for everyone in this room. That we need to know what the recognition of rights looks like and feels like. And it means that we all need to help on the things that really matter. As the chief said, we all know that there's a lot of work to do. We do have to close the gaps in health, education, and housing. And all of us know that there's still way too many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis living in third world conditions. The finance minister says often in his speeches that the biggest applause is with the commitment to end the boil water advisories by 2021. That's something people understand, and I don't think people understood that there were people who couldn't turn on their tap and be able to just drink the water as they're sending their checks to other countries. We actually have to do both, but we have to make sure that those kids who have never been able to turn the tap on in their community actually have the hope that this will stop, and that means real strategies. What, by when, and how. And so we know that the almost $20 billion of new investments is truly impressive, but we know that change is happening. But today I want to make sure that everyone truly understands why self-determination is an imperative on the path to reconciliation. Inherent rights don't come from the Constitution or from the courts. Inherent rights are inherent. They've been here since time immemorial. Since Confederation, the Crown has usurped the authority of Indigenous peoples over governance and education, health, housing. It then downloaded Child and Family Services and the management of their lands and waters to the provinces and territories. And since Confederation, the quality of life of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis have diminished. It's going down. And it's what happens when your rights are ignored and your land is taken away and your dignity is taken away and when you're referred to as savages. When the colonizers thought that their ways were superior, they imposed their ways with the Indian Act and tried to take the Indian out of the child with residential schools. Shockingly, the last residential school closed in 1996. The results have been devastating. We see it in missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, in suicide, TB rates, diabetes, the overrepresentation of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis children in the foster care, and Indigenous people in prison. As the Deputy Chief of Lake Babine said to me last week, the status quo has got to go. And so, as the Minister of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation in British Columbia says, his job is to do substantive damage to the status quo. Indeed, but as Ursula Franklin's husband Fred used to say to me, we have to stop awfulizing. We have to stop the gap analysis. We've got to begin with appreciative inquiry. What's working and how do we build on that? In the Hollow Water study in 2002, they said that healing is really just decolonization therapy. The fact is, Indigenous-led governance and initiatives get better results. The Community Wellbeing Index shows significant differences in the income, housing, and labor force participation rates for Indigenous groups with those nations who have entered into modern treaties and are asserting jurisdiction and self-government. Specifically, self-governing First Nations have better socioeconomic outcomes, including higher post-secondary education completion rates, lower unemployment rates, higher employment and labor force participation rates. These outcomes obviously increase the health, well-being, and prosperity of Indigenous communities, both for their benefit, but for the benefit of all Canadians. Chief Leroy Denny of the Eskasoni First Nation reminds us that 20 years ago, the Mi'kmaq in Nova Scotia decided to take over their education system. He says that was the day he decided to become a teacher. The high school graduation rate at that time was 30%. Today, the big Mi'kmaq education system in Nova Scotia has a high school graduation rate of about 90%, which is higher than that of the non-Indigenous population in Canada. We are all impatient. It says in my mandate letter, accelerate the path to self-determination. I am so grateful that the Prime Minister decided to follow the recommendations of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal People and dissolve the INAC department. It was designed to enforce the Indian Act. And now we are building two new departments, a temporary one, as the Prime Minister explained on the front steps of Rideau Hall at the time, which will deliver the programs and services until nations will be delivering these programs and services themselves. Minister O'Regan is getting real results, including the transformative legislation on child and family services. Crown-Indigenous relations will exist in perpetuity as we walk the path of reconciliation. Canada will always need correction. As Nellie Cornway said in 1975, paternalism has been a total failure. Canada will always need to be reminded that the espoused partnership must feel like a partnership to our partners. Le grand chef Condé de la Première Nation Huron-Wendat nous rappelle que notre relation est un mariage, pas un divorce. It is why my department's job is to hold up the honor of the Crown in this relationship that really must be much more like a marriage of equal partners, of substantive equality, as the Chief said. So almost every day I also learn something new about the inspiring reconciliation initiatives by organizations and individuals across the country who are making an effort to understand and to make things better. Max and the Canadian Roots Exchange, the Gord Downie Tanny Wendat Foundation, the Rotary Club's HIP initiative, the sitting in the evening in Dryden in Senator Bayek's sort of hometown, dealing with the Friendship Center, with the Dryden Anti-Racism Network, the doctors and the police and the high school teachers all coming together with the First Nations youth trying to determine what do they do about the racism that exists in that region. Raymond Curry's Circles of Reconciliation. Last week at the regular stocktake meeting with the Prime Minister, I told the Prime Minister about the Treaty 3 Chiefs meeting at Obishkandagan. I was invited to the breakfast and then was asked to meet the cooks and servers. They were actually the cottagers from around the lake at Lake of the Woods who'd come in to cook and serve the breakfast to the chiefs. I think that's what we call reconciliation. Last week in the Winnipeg at the National Centre of Truth and Reconciliation, the Executive Director, Ryan Moran, said the information about the truth will never be transformative until people really feel it. They have to share or understand the pain. One is never the same again when one hears firsthand from elders, survivors, youth, and women. To participate in a Keros blanket exercise, to see the art of Kent Monkman or Annie Pugatuk or Christy Belcourt, to watch Indian Horse and then want to read everything Richard Wagamese ever wrote, to be scolded by Lee Maracle in Conversations with Canadians or in As Memory Serves. And it's even better in person. Be amused, educated by reading Thomas King's Inconvenient Indian and Daryl Dexter's Beast Pipe Dreams. This winter at the Tarragon, we've seen Drew Hayden King's hilarious yet consciousness-raising Cottagers and Indians, and the dark, moving Kivalliq Returns in Inuktitut. Listening to Jeremy Ducher's spectacular Polaris Prize and Juno-winning album, his trained tenor voice in his Maliseet language with the archived voices of his elders mixed in. Even better to see him in person, as we did at the Danforth Opera House or the Future Cities Conference at the Evergreen Brickworks. The stories, the images, and the music of the ballet Going Home Star changed people's understanding. Artists are so often at the forefront of societal change. They offer us a window into the worlds that are unfamiliar. Les artistes nous poussent à faire face et comprendre les injustices, les ressentir. The truth about residential schools and the abuses there and the failed child welfare industry is teaching Canadians about trauma. The concept of trauma-informed care is teaching us that we've been asking the wrong questions. Instead of asking what's wrong with him or her, we need to be asking what happened to him or her. There is a direct link between abuse, anger, shame, drugs, alcohol, suicide, violence, incarceration. We need all of you to help on this journey. Tap into all of your networks. Call out the racism, challenge the stereotypes, correct misinformation, but most important, be intentional about making new friends. I promise you, it will change your life. Will change your understanding of being Canadian. Will you help celebrate the new Royal Alberta Museum with its huge pre-contact exhibition? Celebrate the decision of the McGill to remove Redmond as the name of their sports team. And will you help Nathan Obed to pressure the Edmonton Eskimos to change their name? We all need to understand that we are all treaty people. There was original understanding that we would share this land fairly. It was about peace and friendship. It's time to imagine a better, fairer Canada and be part of making it happen. After almost 40 years of Section 35 of the Constitution Act, it's not right that First Nations, Inuit, Métis have to claim their rights. It's that the idea of this is our final offer, see you in court, and then lose. Surely we've got enough a body of jurisprudence to say we should get to the table. This business of being in court is ridiculous waste of time and money. And so we want that to happen. And it means resource revenue sharing. It means minerals and forest and fishery. And as the chief said, we actually have to share, and it will make this country so much better. So let's celebrate the successes. I am so moved when I meet the inspiring young university students, the Indigenous students who want to be the public servants in their government. that they want to be doctors and entrepreneurs and scientists and engineers and midwives, but every day they just are exemplifying the hope and taking on the responsibility of realizing the shared goal of self-determination, which will propel this country forward. So we are reminded what happened when women entered the economy in the 50s. It took off. Organizations like CCAB are helping us on our way. Indigenous businesses are now contributing the majority of the $9 billion Indigenous contribution to the Manitoba economy. It's an exciting time. The momentum is palpable. When Stephen Sacker asked me on BBC Hard Talk why it was any different now, this government, this minister, I told him of the story of paddling for 3 hours on the North Saskatchewan River with the youth from La Loche who had just been through a terrible tragedy. We hit a rock. We got into water so shallow we had to get out and walk our canoes through, but the current was with us, and we got to our destination at Batoche. I do believe the current is with us, but we need you and all your networks with your paddles in the water. The youth are insisting. You cannot be in the way. The youth want this to happen. And I think in closing, you'll find Max Fine Day's optimism quite contagious. So we look forward to your questions. Thank you. Merci, miigwech.
I'm just going to jump right up. Minister, thank you so much. We're going to jump right into the questions, given the little time that we have and the incredible amount of ignorance in the room. I'm kidding, everybody. Just relax. I'm kidding. It's all good. We're going to have some fun. There's some great questions here. And we're going to be brave. We're going to be brave. We're going to think about what we don't know. I'm going to lead you in that, being extraordinarily brave myself. They don't call us braves for nothing, Minister Bennett. You know this. So the first thing I would say is that piece of paper that was on everybody's table is an incredible resource. And I would encourage you all to take it home. I will be very upset if you don't. There's some incredible organizations and works that you can read once we leave here today. Minister Bennett, you have one of the most difficult portfolios in government. I always think about you, and I think about Minister McKenna, dealing with climate change, and you dealing with so many of the challenges that we see, whether it's on the national or on in other media, just how much work there is to do. Can you tell us what keeps you up at night? What are you worried about? What challenge? What's one of the biggest challenges that you see to achieving reconciliation now, currently?
I think what worries me the most is that we do have momentum now, and I want to make sure that it can't roll backwards. I think that there is obviously cynicism amongst First Nations Inuit Métis after 150 years of broken promises. We're not going to have everybody on side ready to partner, but I hope that by showing the momentum and the progress, that everybody will understand that this is a better way to go forward, and that we can make that kind of real progress that the Canadians would be furious if it was ever allowed to slip backwards.
Yeah, and you made a really good point during your remarks. You said that Canadians were never taught this in school. My parents weren't. My parents' generation, my grandparents' generation weren't taught about many of the problems and the issues in school. A lot of these folks in the room weren't taught about it. Now that we're aware, about colonization, the impacts of residential schools, even the ongoing problems today, I think you are so keenly able to share with Canadians about what's happening in Indigenous communities today. You've eaten seal eyes in Iqaluit. You've danced with grandmothers in Akwesasne. You've been yelled at by chiefs in my home territory, and so you have a really good idea of who Indigenous people are. What do you wish Canadians knew about Indigenous people and about who we are? What do you wish they were taught in school?
Well, I think there's the transactional, really bad government policies that people understand. I remember being there in Helsik First Nation at the big house, and I think I learned something about potlatches. I certainly never learned they'd been banned. And I think that's the kind of you've got to fill in those gaps for people. But I do think that the Indigenous world view, that man is not the boss. Mother Earth is the boss. And we're finding that out the hard way, it seems, because we didn't take care of her. And so I think this idea that I think we have, to be on the Georgian Bay is spiritual for me. To understand that we plan to go to Killarney, and then, on the Environment Canada website, the whole of the bay lights up bright red and we're not going anywhere. That it's the humbling nature of us actually needing to understand that, and that's why I think I put on the list Indigenous healing. Rupert Ross, who was the Crown prosecutor in Kenora, he sort of maps his learnings going through and the importance of the Indigenous worldview and how important that is. He also talks about what happened in residential school when emotion was just drummed out of people and they weren't allowed to show emotion and they weren't allowed to cry, and how in a courtroom that that you can end up with somebody who looks like it's happening to somebody else. And unless you understand really where that came from, and I think, I really loved the TRC event at the Native Canadian Centre with the Jewish community, with the Holocaust survivors and the residential school survivors, whose children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren really had a lot in common, not understanding really what that trauma had meant and why they sometimes behaved the way they did. And I think that, it's been important for people to understand this issue of trauma-informed care, not trauma on the patch of a paramedic.
Yeah, that's a great point. And something I don't think people think enough about when they see one of my relatives on the street and asking for change or maybe intoxicated in public. Some of these things that we see in our cities across the country, they don't see someone who unfortunately went through a residential school, right? Who was taken from their family, lost their sense of identity, their culture. They just see somebody who's looking to make trouble, right? And that's difficult, when you don't have the backstory. And so many Canadians don't. How do we, in this age of nationalist bully tactics that we see on the rise, are we at risk of seeing a sort of de-reconciliation that, that might come from folks not having that information? As we see folks like the Yellow Vest movement, as we see darker sides of Canadian politics coming out. Do you think that we will see some effort to de-reconcile or destabilize reconciliation? And how can we inform Canadians here in the room, those of us who are in downtown Toronto, to help their friends, their relatives, their neighbors, and their colleagues to make this a ballot box issue for them?
I thought it was really interesting at the Public Policy Forum Thursday night when the dealing with that sort of populism was explained by saying that's what happens when you aren't presenting solutions, when people only are presented with a complex problem. I think H.L. Mencken said for every complex human problem, there's a neat, simple solution. It's just that it's wrong. Whether that's more cops, more prisons, less taxes, like it is. And I think we have to be presenting real solutions. But if we can present solutions co-developed with First Nations, Inuit, Métis that allow everybody to celebrate progress together because it was their idea, and that, as states as Chief LaForme said, we're just getting out of the way to be able to help them do what they want to do and know they need to do for their families and their land and their water. But it will be important for everybody in this room to understand really how it works in the places where they have self-government. That when you look at West Bank in Kelowna or Kanaha, where they're coming together as a nation, and the work that they're doing together with tech industries, there is really exciting stories, and I think we've got to do a better job getting them out there so that everyone in the room can say, yes, but, we have to stop awfulizing. We have to actually be able to say there are such huge successes, and all of us should be part of celebrating those successes.
Mm-hmm. That's perfect. Well, the next question we have is from a skeptic in the room. I love a good skeptic. This question asks, what is the difference between you and Minister O'Regan? They both do Indigenous relations. Isn't it kind of confusing? Don't you get confused, Minister?
This is 2 and 2 makes 5.
Do you both ever show up at the same meeting thinking, no, I thought you were gonna, no, I thought you... Does that ever happen?
No.
Okay, good, okay.
And we have Minister LeBlanc as well, in terms of the Minister of the North and intergovernmental. We're eventually trying to fill the whole cabinet table with people who get it, right?
I love it.
And who have that responsibility. And I think having the new Reconciliation Committee of Cabinet has really made a difference. But I think that, the Royal Commission said you need one person whose only job is to be moving on self-determination and that progress of decolonizing and nation-to-nation, government-to-government, Inuit to Crown. And the other person can focus on the services and programs temporarily until those nations can do those things themselves. And that's what's exciting, is that we still need 2 ministers. But the faster I do my job, the faster we won't need a Minister of Indigenous Services. And I think that's what I think is exciting. And yet we really do support one another. When there was a question about infrastructure and about how much should go to housing, how much needs to go to infrastructure, all of those things. And I had been in Pikangikum shortly after the horrible house fire. The house fire took the lives of that family, the 7 little graves that we saw. But it was because the road was so bad that the fire truck couldn't get there on this very thick and up and deep washboard that just meant that the fire truck couldn't get to that house. We actually need people to understand that it's not simplistic solutions. We have to help in that full holistic approach to good governance, but also making sure that we are listening to what the community says they need.
That's great. We have time for just a few more questions. I like a forward-looking one. I'm a bit of an optimist myself.
I know you are.
As you might, most people call me foolish. I prefer optimist, but someone's asking us in 100 years, looking back now, how will our children's children know if we have advanced reconciliation?
It really will look and feel like nation to nation. Our laws will be written in common law, civil law, and Indigenous law. We will actually have a way of understanding that a lot of the legal customs and practices that were here first were very wise, that we would actually have a justice system instead of just a legal system. So I think if we will be protecting Mother Earth a lot better than we have. And we will not see that the economy and the environment are separate things and that we can't afford to look after the environment. I think that all of those settler teachings would come to the forefront of the way we behave as Canada.
That's incredible. That sounds like, makes me want to stick around for the next 100 years, you know? Sounds like a lot of fun. The last question, Minister Bennett, that I have for you, it's a really hard-hitting one. It's going to be very, very difficult to answer. Baked bannock or fried bannock, what's your favorite?
Quite often, I think the fried. Yeah.
Friends and relatives, and that's coming from a medical professional.
With jam.
That's how good it is. Minister Bennett, that's all the time we have for questions today. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, that was a really terrific discussion. Thanks to you both. My name's Andrew Graham. I'm the president of the Canadian Club, and it's my honor to say thank you to the Minister for joining us. Minister, thank you so much for being with us today and helping inform all of us in the audience about what we can all do to advance reconciliation in this country. I think the passion you bring and the intelligence you bring to this issue and you brought to your remarks today is really incredible. And I think you also have the distinction of being the first speaker, I think ever maybe at the Canadian Club, who's actually brought homework for the audience to complete. So you do have homework in front of you today. Minister will be coming back in a year. We're going to see how many check boxes that everyone has beside their name. But in all seriousness, I think it's really great to have action that we can take away and ways that we can all get smarter and more informed about these issues. So thank you so much, Minister, for joining us. And Max, thanks to you as well. I mean, reconciliation can be certainly a topic that's weighty, and there's many serious aspects to it, but Max shows us how it can also be fun and entertaining at times to tackle these issues. Max, you brought a lot of thought and good humor to that conversation. Thank you as well. Just before we conclude and I let you all go, I'll just tell you about a couple of upcoming events we have. On Wednesday this week, we're going to welcome the leader of the opposition in Ontario, that's Andrea Horvath, to our podium. And on the 30th, we're going to host a panel discussion entitled Being Brown Downtown, focusing on the lived experiences of ethnic minorities in corporate Canada. We hope you can join us for both of these events. Finally, I'd like to extend another thanks to Bruce Power. Thank you so much for sponsoring today's event. And finally, a big thank you to MediaEvents.ca, Canada's online event space, and VVC for live streaming today's event. Finally, thanks to all of you for attending. Hope to see you again soon.